Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Real Life Health Show. Today, I am going to be doing a response video, and not really a response video, more of an agreement video with my friend John Kohler from OK Raw, because it's such an important topic that I talk about often, and I'm glad to see him mentioning this because this is a trap that I fell into, and we're going to talk about this today. The topic is why this raw vegan prefers steamed versus dehydrated vegetables. So John Kohler is a friend of mine who's been eating a raw vegan diet mostly for 29 years, literally doing like 99.9%, as he always used to say, for a very long time. But more recently, in the last couple of years, he started including some, he called it heat process, but it's literally cooked food, back into his diet. And I myself did it the other way around. I've been on a 100% raw vegan diet for just as long as he has. But in that process, after, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13 years, I started to experiment with some cooked food. And then I decided, nope, the raw vegan's the way to go. And been back on 100% raw vegan since then. Regardless, it's not about titles, folks. You can be very healthy on a vegan diet with cooked food. It's not a title you need to be a raw 100%. I have my own personal reason for staying 100% raw. That's because I had an illness, and when I include food that is not its ideal state, it can cause me to have some problems or possibly the illness to come back. So I have to be very careful in what I do eat, and I have to be very careful about it because it's an intestinal inflammation that I had, and I don't want to upset anything down there. So I decide to eat foods that I consider the highest quality and best foods for me. And any time I go backwards, or if I suggest or decide to go backwards, I think it might not turn out well. So I don't want to test it. I don't want to chance it. I tried doing that and found out the hard way that that's not the way to do it. But that's not the topic of this video. This video is a topic about this important subject. The raw vegan prefers steamed versus dehydrated vegetables. First of all, for the title, this raw vegan, I would not consider John a raw vegan because he's eating cooked food. However, some people will say, well, he's a raw vegan because he's eating a certain percentage of cooked food, high raw or something like this. No, look, if you're eating 1% animals, you're no longer a vegan. So how do you identify as a vegan if you're eating animals, right? Even if it's a 1%. Well, if you're eating cooked food, you're not a raw foodist or a raw vegan. But that doesn't matter. It really doesn't. What matters are important topics like this, and this is a tremendously important topic that people need to understand, because all raw is not healthy. And I'll take it one step further. John says in this video, and I'm not going to go through the whole video because, as you can see, it's 57 minutes long. It's too long for me to go through the whole one, but I do recommend this video, and I recommend you go to the video. We'll look at some of the things he said. But I'm not saying people need to eat steamed vegetables versus dehydrated vegetables. What I'm saying is people should eat none of them, steamed or dehydrated. Just eat the vegetables raw in a salad, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. John's getting scientific here and breaking it down, and why certain steamed vegetables are better, like root vegetables might be better if they're steamed, and dehydrated vegetables. I've interviewed a lot of people that have been a raw vegan for many, many years. Some stopped doing 100% raw vegan, and some continue with it. I've interviewed raw vegans. Some are still thriving today after 60 years on a raw vegan diet in their 90s. And I've also, some of the people I've interviewed years ago have died. Well, they were older, 70s, 80s, 90s, and died. So I've seen a lot out there. And I want to look at this topic and let's see what John has to say. And I'll tell you this. Let me share my testimony on this topic before we get into what John has to say. So I'm doing 100% raw vegan. I had inflammatory bowel disease, also known as ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, inflammation of the colon. 19 years old, I get diagnosed with it. I started a raw vegan diet after going back and forth to doctors and so on. I get 100% better after that. 100% better on a raw vegan diet. Doing wonderful. And like I said, after several years, I tried to go back to cooked food and raw goat milk. I started to have stomach problems again. I knew the raw vegan diet was the way to do it and the way to keep it. I had a raw food restaurant in New York, and it was actually the world's biggest raw food restaurant, 2 floors. And I also worked at the one of the best and still existent vegan restaurants, putting raw food on the menu, Caravan of Dreams in New York City as well. When I was into raw, I was making a lot of raw food recipes for people at the restaurants. And for my own thing, I didn't eat too many recipes. I have several videos talk about recipes and how they can be quite tricky and so on. Well, let me fast forward to about maybe 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I decided, I believe it was 4 years ago. I could be wrong on the timing of that. I decided to go on a water fast. Now, I've done water fasting over the years, a couple of days. I've done weeks, maybe 7 days or so on. But I embarked on a 30-day water fast. And up to that point, my diet was basically handfuls of kale, some coconut water, and fruit. Very simple. Very simple. Well, after I did the water fast, during the water fast, I just kept thinking about the recipes that I made all those years prior. And I was like, wow. So I said, when I break this fast, I'm going to start eating some of these recipes again. So then I broke the fast and I started to include the recipes. Now, the recipes had a lot of dehydrated foods in them. And I pretty much weighed 140 pounds. I went from 160 pounds when I was sick to 140 pounds when I was raw, thriving, feeling great. Everyone telling me, oh, you look too skinny and all, but I felt amazing. And I didn't look too skinny. I go to the gym, I exercise, I feel amazing. But then I started eating the dehydrated foods. And how much? I mean, 1 meal a day I would have dehydrated food. I would still eat fresh salad. I would still eat fruit. But 1 meal a day I would have dehydrated food. I would have like a dehydrated pizza or a dehydrated taco or something, raw dehydrated food. And it wasn't a lot, but it was some. Sometimes it was a lot, but it was some. And my weight went back up to almost 160 pounds without even realizing. I'm like, wow, this isn't. And I exercise in the gym. I'm like, well, I'm just getting bigger and stronger and try to justify that. I still felt great. I felt really great, but I knew it wasn't the ideal place to be. I decided, maybe about 6 months ago, I always spoke and taught about liquid being such an important part, and the hydration is so important. So, I was never really a fan of dehydrated food to begin with, in terms of from a health standpoint, because you're taking the liquid out of the food. Well, then I decided to 100% stop eating dehydrated foods, and guess what? I went back to 140 pounds. I lost 18 pounds when I stopped eating dehydrated foods on a 100% raw vegan diet. That spoke volumes to me. And I'm not 100% against dehydrated food for everyone. I think people that are making a transition to a raw food diet, dehydrated foods are wonderful. I think for people that want a snack every now and then, it's dehydrated. It's acceptable. But ultimately, the ideal diet will not have dehydrated food in it, in my opinion. And so, what's the next alternative? Well, John's going to present here about steaming vegetables versus dehydrated food. Well, now then you're just a vegan. You're no longer a raw vegan, because now you're eating cooked foods, and that's okay. But And I agree. I'm in agreement. Steamed vegetables are probably healthier than dehydrated vegetables or dehydrated food. John didn't have to convince me. They're probably healthier, or they are healthier, or they're not as not healthy. But me wanting to be on a 100% raw vegan diet, recommending it, knowing it, see, cooked food still has its issues. And yes, just because dehydrated vegetables is better than, or steaming vegetables is healthier than dehydrated vegetables, it doesn't mean that steamed vegetables are the way to go. You know, they have their drawbacks also. And also, me wanting to maintain or having to maintain a 100% raw vegan diet, if I include steamed vegetables or other cooked food, or as John calls it, heat processed foods in my diet, now I'm opening up my taste buds to all sorts of flavors and other things that I want to avoid, because on a 100% raw vegan diet, I have no desire for cooked food. But if I ate some cooked food, I know it would open up the floodgates and I have a desire for more. So you have to decide where you want to be. But for me, I want to be 100% raw vegan. And I'm going to do it with very limited to no dehydrated food as the ideal way to do it. That's for me at this place where I am now. Again, as for John, including some cooked food in his diet, we could make a video about cooked versus raw another time in terms of what's better, like fresh fruit right off of the tree, or fresh greens right out of the garden and making a salad, or having a dehydrated or heat processed, or even a dry processed food or something. So let's hear a little about John's decision here. And I just wanted to share what I just shared because it's such a great topic that he brought up. There's not a lot of people in the raw vegan world talking about this topic. And, you know, I'm glad he did, and I'm glad it's getting out there. So I just want to, I don't like to use the word warn, but I just want to tell people, if you're new to the raw vegan diet, enjoy those recipes, enjoy the flavors and the amazing taste that you can get from raw vegan food. But as you stay in this diet and you get into this a longer time, limit to a high degree the recipes and the amount of dehydrated food in your diet. Okay? So that's from my experience, 29 years on a 100% raw vegan diet with a couple of years in between where I kind of went off the wagon. But limit it and you'll do better. Dehydrated foods are not, you know, I always say, one of the reasons you want to give up cooked food, it's like swallowing a sponge and it sucks up all the water from the body. Well, when you're eating dehydrated food, you're swallowing a dry sponge and it's sucking up even more water, and that's not a good thing. So let's hear a little about what John has to say.
Right, this is John Kohler with OKRaw.com. Today we have another exciting episode for you. In this episode, we're going to go ahead and compare two food processing techniques. One, of course, is used in raw food preparation, which I did do for many years. And nowadays, I use another food preparation technique called steaming, which, in my personal opinion, I would personally rather eat steamed food than dehydrated food.
It's called cooked food, and he'd prefer to eat cooked versus raw, and that's his decision. That's not my choice, but the topic, steaming versus dehydrated, is great, but the title's misleading because he's not a raw vegan. But he addresses later in the video, he says 75% raw, or 80 or 90% raw is considered raw vegan. Titles and everything else, you either are or you're not. Okay, and it's okay. He's still a good friend of mine, and great information. And I'm not saying you can't be healthy with cooked food. So let's hear this a little.
I have heard some of my raw food friends say they got to keep it raw and they'd rather eat dehydrated stuff than steamed stuff. That being said, the other thing I will say is that dehydrated food is not optimal. It's best to eat things fresh. That being said, dehydration is used as a crutch for many people to kind of step into eating more raw foods. And I would highly make the argument that it might be better just to eat more steamed vegetables instead of even dehydrated vegetables to, eat healthier instead of just trying to maintain this raw label. Anyways, in this episode, I'm going to share my thoughts on dehydration versus steaming, as well as, of course, published studies, because published studies, will play partly in how I choose to live my life. And I, of course, make these videos for you guys to share with you guys my thoughts, my information that literally you guys aren't going to hear anywhere else. So if you guys appreciate my content, before I forget, thumbs this video up. Also, be sure to click that subscribe button right down below and click the little bell so you get notified as my new videos come out. I am, in my opinion, what I call a divergent thinker and think of it differently than many people in our plant-based raw food eating style program. And I will have content that may blow your mind because you're really not going to hear it anywhere else. And I want you guys to benefit from all my knowledge, research, experience.
So I've been saying for many years, it's the climate you live in. Like if you're trying to maintain 100% raw vegan, but if you're living like in Minnesota where it's cold, you're much better off eating steamed vegetables or something than eating a raw food candy bar to maintain that 100% raw food title or label. So I've been saying that. But when it comes to raw food and the idea, there's not many people out there that are setting examples of a 100% raw vegan diet long term. I mean, you got myself, Dr. Fred Bishy, Dr. Doug Graham. And then there's people now that are doing it for 8 or 9 years that claim to be 100% raw. But most people that are into the raw food diet are eating pretty much a vegan diet or plant-based or what do you want to call it, but they're not really raw. I mean there's a couple of, I don't know how many people are 100% raw. And again, if you're on a vegan diet, you say call it a vegan diet, but you're eating a little bit of animals, well, you're no longer a vegan. So why would you call yourself raw if you're eating cooked food? So labels can be tricky here. But John definitely has great wisdom because he did the raw food diet for a long time. And I don't know that I'm ever not going to switch back to eating some cooked food. I just know where I am now, and I know how I feel and how my body works and the illness I have and how I just feel amazing. And when I stepped backwards and was eating, when I was eating cooked food, I added some grains to my diet. And I didn't feel bad. I just didn't feel as great as I feel now. So with that being said, let's hear a little bit about what more John has to say, and then we'll look at some of the links or parts of the video.
Experience when you guys subscribe and watch my videos. So thank you so much. Anyways, on with this episode. All right, so as you guys can see, we got dehydration versus steaming. So we got an Excalibur dehydrator here, and I'm in much more favor of dehydrating vegetables or fruity vegetables than sweet fruits these days. Personally, in my opinion, we should just eat our fruits, our sweet fruits, whole, or just vacuum blend them for the best way to eat them. We should not, try to remove water content to make the dried fruit even sweeter and all this kind of stuff.
I'm in 100% agreement. It's a big problem. I don't recommend dried fruit. It's a big problem. Enjoy the fruit with the water content in them. If you are going to dehydrate something, let it be vegetables. When I was eating all my recipes with the dehydrated stuff, it was some dehydrated vegetables. It wasn't dehydrated fruit. These days, the only thing I'm dehydrating is like moringa to make powder from my tree. But it wasn't dehydrated fruit. It was dehydrated vegetables, but mostly dehydrated grain. Well, no, dehydrated nuts. I'm sorry, dehydrated nuts to make crust. For my pizza, I had some dehydrated nuts. So what you would do is you would make like these wraps. So that's another thing. I would make wraps. So you get some nuts and seeds and you blend them up and it creates a liquid and you pour them on a dehydrator tray and it makes it into a wrap or a raw bread or something like that I would use for my raw food sandwiches or a base for the pizza or something. But I'm in agreement with John here. We don't want to dry fruit and make it even sweeter and less concentrated with no water, or more concentrated with no water. We want to have as much liquid in our food as possible. And I always say, how do you know what foods have the best liquid amount in them? And this is what I would say. Picture the best juicer in the world, and you put, which I believe is a Nama J2 juicer, by the way, links below. But you put a fresh carrot in that juicer. It's going to come out carrot juice. You put kale in that juice. It's going to come out kale. Kale juice is going to come out. So that's how you know the foods have the liquid in them. Now, if you steam kale, or if you steam a carrot or dehydrate a carrot, you put that through the juicer, nothing's coming out. And it's a good way to tell. Your body is the world's best juicer, really. So, you want things that are going to go through it really well, and those are the things that have the liquid in them. So I don't recommend dehydrated or steaming our food. I recommend eating them as fresh as possible. And that would be raw, ripe, fresh, and organic.
Or even juice fruits. I'm not a big fan of juicing fruits either. That being said, I don't recommend steaming your, sweet fruits. That'd be insanity. Although I do, however, on occasion steam things like peppers and tomatoes. But mostly I steam vegetables that I would not otherwise eat raw, or can significantly increase the quantities I could eat them. So, for example, I have lots of mustard greens growing in my garden. I've been harvesting mustard greens for the last 4 months. This is the last of them. Harvested a bunch last night, and mustard greens are quite hot. You could eat them raw. They'd probably burn the heck out of your mouth. Probably be really good for you that way. That being said, I do steam them for just actually 5 minutes yesterday. Sometimes I'll put them in for 3, but I had the mushrooms in.
It's quite interesting. As I'm listening to him, I'm thinking, I have something in my yard called chaya. And it's a wild edible green, and there's a lot of wild edible greens that actually have poison to them, and you must steam them to consume them. And chaya is one of the most nutrition foods on the planet. It has so much nutrition, but you have to boil it for 5 minutes to make it digestible and palatable and just safe, because it's poison otherwise. So at this point, I haven't eaten it, even though I grow it, because I don't want the cooked food feeling to come back. But some food you have to cook to make them safe. I have these wild edible books where they say, oh, you can get wild edible greens all over the place, but you have to cook them. So there is a place for steaming if you decide to do just wild foods, and you want to make sure that it's safe to consume. So there's a place for cooking, and that should be in a video another time about cooking versus raw. But bottom line is dehydration versus steaming. I would agree that steaming is not as bad as dehydrating. And, now there's another thing to take into effect, is freeze drying. So freeze drying is another way to dry food. And that's supposed to be better from dehydration. I'd like to see John make a video about freeze drying versus steaming. I'd like to see that video. But either way, they're still drying your food. You're taking out the liquid. But if you go down to his video here, and I'm going to put his link there, it is OK Raw. I'll put a link to the original video. If you go into the description, he breaks down the episodes. So just so you can see it, it's very good that he broke it down on a long video like this. He talks about pressure cooking. That's another way he's cooking his food. He calls it heat process. Good topics here in this video. Pros and cons versus dehydrated versus steaming, and he gets into studies and all this. But I don't want people that are excited to go to a raw vegan diet to be disillusioned that you need to eat cooked food. You don't. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time and interviewing people that have been doing it a long time. Dehydrating versus steaming, my answer would be none. Don't dehydrate or steam. Eat it raw. Raw, ripe, fresh, and organic. But thank you, John, for bringing up this important topic because it helps me to remind people of the dangers of dehydrated food. I don't believe that they're healthy. I think you might be able to maintain the label of raw food vegan if you're dehydrating food, but it's counterproductive to living a healthy lifestyle, especially if a good part of your diet is dehydrated. So be careful because the foods that they were found in nature are the best way to eat them. And those are the ideal foods, okay? So thank you everybody for watching, and please watch John's full video, but don't get confused. Just because John went back to eating cooked food doesn't mean you should or you should avoid 100% raw vegan if you want to try it. But this is an important video where and a good video where I want something to warn people if you want to go 100% raw vegan to be careful with the dehydrated food. All right, everybody. Thank you, John. Again, links are below. Have a great day, everybody, and a great raw life.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show.